Honkai Star Rail is a gacha game, or I guess a mobile game, you could call it, that is quite interesting with its lore, and with lore comes power scaling, as you may know. And since I think this verse is underrated as compared to its other counterpart that exists in the same universe, which is much more talked about scaling-wise, I thought, hey, why not scale the verse? This video will pretty much go over everything for the Honkai Star Rail verse and its characters, regarding their scaling, starting from the bottom to the top. You also mentioned there will be mentions of Honkai Impact 3rd characters for cross-verse scaling, and as such, but I won't be specifically scaling all of Honkai Impact 3rd as well. We'd be here for too long if I were to do that. But essentially, we're going to put it in a tier list format, going from the bottom to the top. But we will start with the pathsteiders. Obviously excluding the ones that don't show no feats or no real comparisons to others, so I'm sorry to the 5 people that wanted me to pixel calc the knife and explosion. I sincerely apologize. But you may ask, what is a pathsteider and what is a path? I think let's go over some basic definitions that will be repeated throughout the video. A path is essentially imaginary energy, which is the concept that governs individual objects, as well as this energy being abstract in nature as well. Abstract energy is known to do a lot of things in this verse. It's an extremely powerful energy source that governs the laws and truth of the universe, as what concepts do and how they interact with reality. Imaginary energy is quite literally the law of the universe, which makes sense considering its energy that comes from the imaginary tree, which we'll get a lot more into later. A path is the manifestation of this philosophical concept, and those who believe and follow the ideals of said concepts are known as pathsteiders. Give an example, someone who is angry and destructive and has a short temper would follow the path of destruction. Being a pathsteider makes you much stronger than the normal being, as you gain a very small power from the gods known as the Aeons, with a perfect conceptual manifestation of the paths of the Aeons. To give you a good comparison, they're your Xenos, they're your one above alls, that type shit. However, they will mostly ignore the average pathsteider, finding them insignificant. That's why they only give them such a small amount of their power. However, if they find something interesting, they will be granted a lot more power from that Aeon and be known as an emanator. Emanators being characters who, once again, just get the power directly from the Aeon outright and are usually much stronger than the average pathsteider, oftentimes serving directly under their specified Aeon. Unless you're AHA or IX. There is currently 18 different known paths, going as the Destruction Path, which is the path that admires recklessness, anger, and destructive behavior. The Hunt, which follows determination, ruthlessness, and tenacious behavior. The Erudition, those who follow logic and strategic behavior. The Harmony, which admires understanding, support, and cooperative behavior. Nihility, those who are lazy, exhaustion, and indulge in meaningless behavior. Preservation, people who admire patience, sacrifice, and defensive behavior. The Abundance, which is people who are selflessness, altruism, and healing behaviors. Some other paths that don't have more defined descriptions are the Remembrance, the Trailblaze, the Elation, the Velocity, the Beauty, the Permanence, the Propagation, the Enigma, the Equilibrium, the Finality, and the Order. So, now that I mentioned all the paths, I'll also mention the Aeons for each path, since these are once again the people that embody a philosophical concept and are the perfect embodiment of the concept that each path embodies. Nanak is destruction, Lan is the hunt, Nous is erudition, Zippy is harmony, Ix is nihility, Kuipath is preservation, Yaoshi is abundance, Fuli is remembrance, Alakvi is trailblaze, Aha is elation, Ouroboros is velocity, Drilla is beauty, Long is permanence, Tazaroth is propagation, Mythos is enigma, Ho is equilibrium, Terminus is finality, and Aena is order. We know more, as I just mentioned, we know more about certain paths and certain Aeons than others. Due to the game being live service, this may change over time. Now that we got basic definitions out of the way, let's go back into the scaling. The average pathsteiders, which are essentially these characters that I mentioned in this video, as they mostly have chain scaling to each other, that with different degrees of, as other pathsteiders on this list are. So there are more exceptions due to this, but Jingli and Sam, who we'll get into later, have direct comparisons with emenators, though there is a majority of chain scaling between them all, mainly coming off of the Trailblazer and the Astral Express, and all the characters that fight them and who they fight. And there's a lot of characters for that, but I will mostly be covering the Emanator scaling later, and I'll mostly be going on the lower tier stuff to get an average baseline for the verse. And then later on, we'll go into the higher ends. But even the baseline for this verse are quite impressive, as we'll get into. Since I know that a lot of the scaling for this verse can be quite iffy, and people don't really want to believe the cosmological side of this, if you want to believe the scaling caps at the finite ranges for everyone but the Aeons, that is fine, but the Aeons are just objectively do not have finite scaling, as we'll get into later. The absolute lowest balls for this verse would go into the continental to planetary range, and even the star ranges. As we know, this verse is easily continental from Himiko's orbital cannon, something that Adventuring can tank, who other characters can keep up with, mainly the Express, and then yada yada chain scaling from there. There is also Fentalia hitting the same group with a star, and Colia freezing the surface of the planet and Belobog. All of them either tanking the feat or being chain scaled to the character, at least durability wise. But this is extremely casual for them. This is the most casual end for them. The Doomsday Beast, a beast Himiko, the MC, March, and Dan Heng are able to fight, is outright called a planet destroyer by Himiko and official sources, with Welt stating this class of enemy is generally busters. Aside from this beast, also, Welt also says that this class of enemies is generally planet busters. This is consistent as the Celeron Hunters have their own statements of being planet busters, including even Sobral, who is physically quite weak, and Kafka, who the MC and March can fight. We know this statement is true, as Sam, a member of the Celeron Hunters, just by flying off the planet, destroys the planet so hard the feat is calced in the small star ranges of power. So it's very fair to apply this line of scaling to the other Celeron Hunters, and therefore everyone as well. And this would actually be consistent for the high end of Colia's feat. This would actually also get into the planetary ranges. However, as we mentioned, we can get this verse into the star ranges of power. Not only does base Dan Heng one-shot a star-devouring monster in his character story, Welt's casual black holes, once again Sam Welt, everyone would chain scale off of from this point, like the Kafka fight, are calculated to be in the large star levels of power. The star range of power is consistent with the Stellar Hunter's casual from Dwarf star feat, as mentioned before, but you can get this higher due to the fact that several pathsteiders have some low-end relativity to the Emanators. This is also getting into like the very baseline from where the Emanators cap at. This is like the low end for the relative Emanators, or the finite scaling for them, such as Blade having quote-unquote Emanator level durability, who other pathsteiders can harm, and the main cast fighting against and surviving attacks from several different Emanator level characters, or even fight alongside them. The Galaxy Rangers fighting an Emanator of Destruction is a good example, and there's many more examples that should be on screen. There is many ways to chain scale pathsteiders to Emanators, not fully of course, but it should be fine to upscale the pathsteiders off of the lower end casual Emanator feats, which is fine. Which leads them to upscale off the Lord Ravengers, who on several different occasions have been said to be Galaxy Busters, which even Sealy, who is a random low tier, has supernova levels of power, Welt having the same statement, and the higher ends for Welt's black holes being calculated at the same level. So Galaxy to even multi-galaxy would be consistent. But the highest possible end you can get the average pathstrider to is Uni Plus, due to the fact the aforementioned imaginary energy, which is the source of their power, is outright confirmed to be a higher dimensional power, and something that a 3D plane cannot explain or understand. This is consistent, as we know imaginary energy has been used to create tears in higher dimensional space-time, and we will get more into this later. But now, before we move on to the Emanators and the Aeons, let's go over a basic scale for the cosmology within the verse, since the non-finite scaling for the Emanators and Aeons relies on this cosmology. Starting with the universe is confirmed to be boundless in size and has infinite space-time within it.
Space and time are practically infinite, and yet right here, right now, we find ourselves together.
The universe contains the dreamscape as well, the dreamscape being a plane of existence that is described as multidimensional. We know in this context multidimensional to actually include the fourth dimension, as this dreamscape is described to be able to affect and manipulate as well as ignore time, space, and gravity, which is just the curvature of space-time. However, we even know the simulated universe, which is a machine that contains an exact, infinitely expanding replica of our universe. So there's essentially two of the universes within this universe. We also know the simulated universe contains the concept of dimensionality. So even on its own, at the low end, the single universe within Honkai Star Rail is a low multi-construct. However, this gets even more impressive when we look at what Honkai Impact 3rd has to offer, which, for those who don't know, is another game that is connected to Honkai Star Rail directly, just another universe within the wider cosmology, such as when even one character will travel to the other universe, such as Sparkle going to Honkai Impact 3rd or Will going to Honkai Star Rail. All the other Hoyoverse games are connected, but only Honkai Impact 3rd and Guns Girl Zero, but I don't want to talk about Guns Girl Zero, essentially adds to the scaling. But this is important because of how the universes are formed. They are formed from infinite versions of parallel universes, which are the exact same universes as the universe that they are made of. Even going on to say that the basis for the many-worlds interpretation, as we know it, is from this idea that there are these infinite of these low multi-constructs that are creating the universes that currently exist. And we also know each of these universes that contain infinite universes, there are infinite of them as well, and they contain these infinite constructs, overall bumping a single universe of Honkai to the multi-clusters of power, since the universes not only have infinite universe within them with infinite space-times within them. In fact, these universes are even called higher dimensional, and that they are created from infinite universe with infinite space-times within them. Essentially infinite multi-plus constructs. And that's just for one universe, actually. We haven't even gotten to the multiverse yet. And to keep in mind, if you want to go for a higher end, each universe is essentially described in a real over fiction construct, or R over F, to where each universe would see the lower one as fiction. Essentially, this means if you want to argue it, you can argue that the construct that these universes create would get up to high hyperversal, if you truly believe this line of scaling to its absolute highest end, which wouldn't necessarily be inconsistent, as we know these higher dimensional things do exist. But let's get into the Sea of Quanta, which in other words is the multiverse. As we already established, this multiverse contains an infinite amount of these multi-plus constructs, which is backed up by stating the multiverse cannot be explained in any third or fourth dimensional reasoning. Which, as we just mentioned, this is extremely consistent. The Sea of Quanta is described as having no time or space, or being beyond the dimension of time and space a couple times. Once again, this would mean that this Sea of Quanta is at least fifth dimensional, or low complex multiversal. There is some higher ends, which mainly get the multiverse to 7th or 11th dimensional via these statements here, which you can argue be backed up by this verse following string theory. Though 5th dimensional is a lot more consistent, and if you want to go for the higher ends, you can also use the RF shit for the universe. I don't think it's a terrible amount. I don't think it's a terrible argument. Something I also want to mention for this high end is there are manifolds here. We also know there are infinite amounts of the Sea of Quanta. In fact, there are so many. We have these things called XPs, which in short terms are just alternate universe variants of our already established characters. Think of the two Himikos, Bronyas, and Seelies in Honkai Star Rail, or Raiden Mei, A, and Acheron, or Yamiko and Sakura. It's similar logic as something what Spider-Verse has. Different variants of Spider-Man are now just different variants of Anti-Woman. Now we have structures beyond the multiverse itself, the imaginary tree. The imaginary tree, as I just said, is entirely beyond the Sea of Quanta and beyond reality as well. Though it seems to be referring to reality as the Sea of Quanta as the same thing, which will be important later. The imaginary tree is the essence of existence, where all these universes, multiverses, etc. are insignificant to it, being compared to as only branches or leaves on it. It's not literal, but it conveys the idea pretty well, described as being beyond dimensions and outright beyond space-time. The imaginary tree is recorded to have absolutely everything in it, every moment, and can create any possible moment as it wishes. There's also a lot of big sciencey things that you can include in here as well, if you still think these ideas make the verse higher, but be my guest if you want to do that. I'm not going to take too much up of your time by mentioning it. There is also the imaginary space, which is a place outside of the tree as mentioned here. The imaginary space is a plane containing all real and imaginary numbers, which has an infinite amount of these imaginary spaces, each with absolute infinity. Finally, there's the Kuna finality, which is a place beyond all the established things and dimensions so far established. But most of the characters don't really scale to it, except for the top tiers of the Honkai Impact Verse, aka Kiana and Vita, as Kiana is outright confirmed to be equal to it, and Vita is considered to be a threat to it, with everyone else being considered mere shadows compared to it. But we'll get more into these comparisons between the HSRs and Emanators and Aeons later. There's also a lot more unimportant things to this cosmology that once again will not affect the scaling all too much, but essentially, consistently, the cosmology is complex multi, but for the highest end, you can argue high hyper to the low outer ranges of power. I know there are probably some minor things I forgot to mention, which I apologize for, but I don't think it changes the scaling of the verse. So, recap. Each universe is multi-plus, infinite of these multi-plus constructs that infinitely transcend one another. Sea of Quanta and contains and transcends all of this and is outright above the 3rd and 4th dimension. So 5 to 60. Imaginary tree is 6 to 70. Imaginary space is 7 to 8D. Kuna finality is 8 to 9D. And once again, as I mentioned before, the higher ends would be anywhere from high hyper to low universal. However, I think personally the complex multi stuff is the better version and is a lot more consistent. But now for the aforementioned big boys, the Emanators and the Aeons. Since a lot of Emanators and the stuff they do is just the lower ends for the Aeons, due to be consistently said that the Emanators just outright get their power from the Aeons, with Acheron, the strongest among them, having higher, more direct scaling to Aeons. People placed in this tier are as follows on screen: Jing Yuan and Acheron and Fei Xiao, True Form Herda, Black Swan, Mr. Wrecker, Fantalia, Sunday's Robot, Jing Liu, and Sam. Although Lily isn't every single emitter on the tier list, as tier lists have that many, these are the relevant ones. Jing Liu and Sam are here because they compare directly to and fight and are stronger than some emitters. They're more so the exception than anything, and no other real pathsteiders scales to them. At the least though, the Aeons with a single thought casually create entire universes and reality, as well as shaking reality itself just by waking up. So even the most casual end for the Aeons would be at least multi-plus, and as well as the Emanators. However, you can get them higher due to the fact that they are described as higher dimensional. And in context, we actually know this is them existing in the same space as the imaginary tree, or on the same level, with Aha even shaking the entirety of the imaginary tree. At least these guys would be complex multi off the imaginary tree, and transcending 5th dimensional constructs. And once again, if you believe the higher ends do that. But after all this, to compare the Emanators and the Aeons to the HSRs, and specifically Kiana and Vita, since this is what the main crossverse scaling comes from. Before I start out comparing the Emanators to the HSRs and the Aeons, I want to give a quick shout out to my friend Squares. He was a huge help in making this part, and I think you should really just check out his channel. He has a lot of amazing works on it, and he really deserves it. Give the guy some love. Anyways, let's start with the Sparkle and Vita fight, since it should be noted that we don't have much of Sparkle's power inverse-wise in terms of like direct attack potency and durability, but she's definitely below people like Acheron as she loses against her, and she's above a no-suit Sam and Trailblazer with her hacks at least. It just flicks them to sleep. But it's quite fair to say the Emanators are above Sparkle, like the major ones, considering Sparkle is never stated to be an Emanator and is most likely just a pathstrider. Unless you want to take this statement literally, which may imply that Sparkle is getting the full essence of Elation in Honkai Impact 3rd, that she would actually be Emanator level, or have the power necessary to be considered that tier. And Sparkle has an encounter with and fights Vita. Sparkle during this is obviously testing Vita. She's seeing if she's worthy to join the Masked Fool. She's not trying to kill her. Vita isn't necessarily going all out either in this fight, but the conclusion is the two are relative, with Vita possibly being on the winning end, though there's no real objective conclusion to this fight. This is interesting because Vita's mere presence is able to cover the entirety of the Sea of Quanta, as well as just outright fusing with it, as well as her just mere existence, transcending time and space, making her consistently 5th dimensional or low complex multi. And while she was holding back, there's no reason she would be holding back to such a degree to where her existence is lowered. So there's no real reason for this to not scale. And we also know Vita is comparable to the Kakuna finality, considering she's gonna go up there and kind of present a challenge to it, like kind of box it. And she's one of the few characters who can actually do this. Another point to mention is that while on the moon, the waves of energy Kiana was releasing are compared to that of an Emanator's power. However, it should be noted she's still growing in power, so subject to say a hypothetical full power Kiana when that happens might be superior to the Emanators. But as of now, and add previous Kiana stuff would be fine to upscale the Emanators off of. This is also a good part to mention that the same beyond the gaze of the gods and untouched by the Trailblaze does not mean that the Honkai Impact 3rd universe is above the Honkai Star one. It's just, we don't really know what it entails, and considering all the things we have, like Sparkle, the random Memo Keeper, entering the world, there's no reason Eon should. It's just more likely that the statement is referring to the fact that Eons just might not care, or might have no reason to. But besides the point, we know that Kiana is above any other HSR, obviously, and the Emanators do scale to Kiana, as we just covered. Also, who still has the power in his prime to kind of back this up. He is still like the same HSR tier. Is evidently not at the same tier as Emanators at all. There is several showings of him just objectively getting his ass kicked by low tier Emanator characters, or having worse performances than low tier Emanator characters such as Danhong IL, or just more or less the actual Emanators like Acheron or something. The Hershey's character, the Kiana scaling is useful because Kiana is considered equal to the Kakuna finality, which is, pretty useful since we know the Kakuna finality is at least 8 to 9B, so it would provide consistency for at least the Emanator scaling to this tier, if not higher. Aside from all this, quickly cover the speed of the verse. Well, for the average pathsteider, the lower ends from relativistic to FTL speeds are fine. The Emanators, higher tier pathsteiders, and anyone in that range who I mentioned would scale to low complex would be immeasurable. But also the fact that people like Jingliu and Acheron both have things that would imply their immeasurable speed, such as Jingliu's slashes moving faster than time, and Acheron just ignoring the concept of speed. For hacks, I'm going to be saving that for more specific character matchups that I have in store, so stay tuned for that. So, that's it. That's how strong Honkai Star Rail is, and I hope you enjoyed this video. But please feel free to leave some specific matchup ideas that could potentially go well for this verse. But to give a quick recap, the lowest tiers being from Country to Star, maybe Galaxy to Universal, with the higher tier echelon of characters being at least multi-plus to complex multi, with the high end for them being high hyper to low outerversal. But obviously a lot of this can be used up to interpretation. Some people believe you can get them a little higher, some people believe the high ends aren't valid at all. So take it how you want to. Anyways, peace.